let's go. So today we are talking about the foods of the Ohlone people. And if you look at this picture, I don't wonder if you guys even recognize what any of these foods are. So as you look at this picture, this is actually from the Ohlone Cafe that was up in Berkeley. Has anybody ever eaten seaweed? Raise your hand if you've eaten seaweed. If you eat sushi, sometimes you'll eat it. And it's seaweed's in some ice creams, which you probably don't even know that it's in there. Let's see, that top picture on the right, those are some little clams. So again, the squishy animal makes the hard shell on the outside. So they would be after that squishy animal on the inside. The next one looks like some flower petals. And you can see them putting up their box lunches together that were for during the pandemic. That next slurry, that's probably some berries. I see some mushrooms. Those long black skinny things, those are called mussels. And we have the smaller mussels here in the bay, but when you go out to the ocean, you're gonna have much larger ones. Again, it would be the squishy animal on the inside they'd be after. Again, seaweed. And the bottom, we've got things like cherries. And then we've made some kind of a soup or a batter maybe, flowers. And then this last little picture in the corner, those are quail eggs. So those looks like some pretty fancy foods. So remember we talked a little bit about the culture of the Ohlones, that they were hunter-gatherers, they lived off the land, they had to pay attention to the seasons, and they had the knowledge that was passed on from generation to generation. They spoke the Chochenyo language that was in this area of Alameda County, but it was not a written down, recorded a written language. So again, things were passed down by learning from each other. But we know that their diet was that of an omnivore. So they ate a little bit of everything. Okay, so they would eat some plants and some animals. They'd eat a little bit of everything. So plants, that would be the berries, the fruits, vegetables. Meat would have been things like the deer and the elk, rabbits. And then we had lots of birds around. Remember all the seabirds and the ducks that we had at Tully Ponds? Then we'd also have eggs as well. So again, those are the types of things that we would be looking for. Now, this is a look at the Ohlone Cafe. I'll let you listen to this video.
You wouldn't know it from the outside, but tucked behind a bookstore on busy Bancroft Way in Berkeley is something very special.
Hello, everybody who is here for Cafe Ohlone. We are just about to get started.
Cafe Ohlone gives people a taste of the East Bay. By that we mean the original East Bay, home of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.
We're grateful to be able to share these foods with you all, to teach you all about who we are as Ohlone people.
Cafe Ohlone offers just a couple of meals a week, and the menu changes frequently. Dishes are only made from ingredients that are native to the East Bay.
Hazelnuts, acorn, venison, salmon, these greens like the watercress that's coming up, our chia seed. Many people are surprised of that. Our food just by itself, it's inherently bougie because our traditional diet, it's so rich, it's so gourmet, it's so delicious.
The pop-up restaurant opened back in 2017 as part of a larger effort to preserve the Ohlone culture. Diners call it a delicious learning experience.
I'm originally from California, and I don't really know a lot about the indigenous groups that were here, and so just to have an opportunity to learn directly from these groups and to consume food that's different and something that I've never had before was really exciting for me.
It reminds me of my ancestors too, like it really touched me. And what it really touched me too is the food. It's so delicious, really good.
The experience and the food keeps the place packed.
10 years ago, it would have been hard to think of so many people gathered over Ohlone foods. But this is also reflective of the changing times and also reflective of how much work has been put in to keep these ways strong.
In Berkeley.
So good.
Candace Wen, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
All right, so you look at that plate full of food that she's got in front of her. She's got some bread, some muffins, salads. There's some quail eggs, fruits and vegetables. So I know you guys may not be really into eating all that many salads or that many vegetables yet. But right now is when you're starting to learn to eat all of those things. But remember, if you were an Ohlone kid way back when, before we had our stores and Pizza Hut, McDonald's, all that stuff, you didn't have a whole lot of choices. Well, I mean, from here, you looked like you had choices, but you kind of ate what was given to you. You ate what was there, and you were good at living off the land. So these are all the things that you would have to know is what you could eat and what you couldn't when you were out looking for food. Because remember, they were hunter-gatherers. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is there in that restaurant, you know, we had access to the refrigerators and to the ovens and the microwaves and the metal spoons and mixers, but the native Ohlonies didn't have all that. So if you even just think about how you cook your food, you know, most of you will get your food and you'll cook it in the microwave, right? You just punch it in there for a couple seconds. You may have parents that cook stuff in the stove, so it's heats for a long time. You may, or in the oven, you may put something on a pot on top of the stove. Either way, all of that is using a heat source to be able to cook your food. So if you were an Ohlone that wanted to cook your food, you would first have to be able to get fire. And this is showing you 2 ways of making fire so that you could prep your food. And one is using stone or chert. So you would take 2 stones and they would flint next to each other, and it might spark enough to get this dry pine needles and grasses to be able to ignite. Okay. The other way is using friction with this wood. If you guys rub your hands together really fast, kind of put a little pressure on them and rub them faster. Faster. Is it getting warm? Well, you see what's happening with our wood there. So they're getting enough friction that heat gets started, and hopefully there gets to be a little ignition. And then those small little fibers, you start to build into a larger fire. You can't just take your little bit of flame and throw a whole bunch of logs on it. That's not how a fire works. So again, they had to learn how to make fire in all different situations. What if it was a rainy season and you're trying to make fire? You got to make sure you've got some dry grasses and all still around, right? You'd always have to have your flints with you. So again, this was a trick. Now, also when it came to preparing food, remember they wouldn't have refrigerators and they didn't have metal. So again, I want you to try to use some imagination. If you were trying to cook some soup, okay, you get your metal pot out and you put it on top of the stove and you grab a metal spoon and you swirl it around. The Ohlones didn't have that. So what they had learned to do, remember last time we had class, I think I showed you a cooking basket where it was a basket made and it was so tightly woven that it held water in it or held moisture in it. So if you look at this piece of wood here that's been carved out, they're taking a hot stone from a fire. It's been all heated up in the fire. Then they put it down in the water and it makes the water boil. So that's their way of cooking. Now, again, they didn't have metal to be able to get tongs to get the stone out of the fire. What are they using? Some wooden branches, okay? Probably some willow or some oak branches there. So again, just putting the hot stone in the fire or putting the stone in the fire, getting it hot, then putting it back in the water would be enough to be able to cook their object. And on this other, they would also have maybe some other stones that would be hollowed out. And again, that would be a way of steaming some of their seafood or their meat or their other dishes. Okay. So again, they would use some of those water in the baskets or the other kind of containers using the hot stones. Pretty cool. All right. Another thing they could do though, is make a fire down in the ground a little bit. But if you think about it, they don't have a lot of containers, right? They would have to make their baskets if they wanted to hold stuff or come up with other containers. Look at how they've cooked up this seafood. Can you see the edges that are brown? That's just some bark. So they've placed their hot stones, maybe created a fire underneath, then line it with the bark, and then they put their seafood in the middle, and those hot stones then cook. The Hawaiians kind of do these deep pits to cook as well. So again, it would be a way of having some heat with the heat stones or the fire where it's kind of buried a little bit. Okay, and you can see that bark is charring. All right, but most importantly, if you got hungry, you'd have to find your food, right? You can't just do a drive-through, no stores to go to. You would have to know what you could find for lunch, how to forage. Okay, we call it foraging. Again, it would hopefully be something that you could quickly prepare. You would have to know where to look for it. And again, you'd have to know if it was safe or not to eat, right? So right now, if you had a garden and you were hungry, you could run by and you could just grab a tomato and munch on a tomato, or you could grab a carrot, munch on a carrot. Okay, but if again, the area looked very different then, we did have a lot more wetlands. And again, native plants were a little bit different. So here he's looking at some eggs, some bird eggs. And you may remember these from last class. We talked about some of the different birds that we had, especially around our waterways with tules. We have our mallards that are taking off there. The green head is the male, brown is the female, and the larger, much larger Canadian geese. Now those are some pretty big birds and they move pretty fast. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to catch a duck or anything. Remember those Canadian geese, if you ever go to Lake Elizabeth, they can be mean. So don't ever approach them. They can be mean, but those are big birds. So again, to try to catch those, they may have used some kind of nets or snares. They may have used those arrowheads and used their bow and arrows. They may have even used something like a slingshot to be able to catch those. But then look at these smaller little birds that run around on the ground. Look at the quail. There's an up close picture of them, and then you can see how fast they can run though. How would you catch those? That would be pretty comical to watch you guys try to catch something like these, huh? So there would be some tricks to it for sure. All right, our larger mammals, again, they would use the meat from, and then also use the hides. They would use just about every part. Remember those antlers and the bones would be used for their tools. But you see here large pictures of the elk. We had lots of elk in the area, and we don't anymore. And that animal that's doing the funny jumping, that's the pronghorn antelope. And we know those have been here because we still have those in our fossil records. So we know those have been in this area for a long time. So again, those they may have hunted with the bow and arrows. But then you've got your little fast critters, like your ground squirrels and your rabbits and hares, and even like the wood rats. How would they catch those? So they might have to make, remember how we were making cordage? So they might have to make some nets or something. They might use snares. They were all different kinds. They were very sophisticated in their way of gathering food. All right, even shellfish, because remember our water areas were much larger. We didn't have all the buildings here. We didn't have concrete and cement. It was all still native, natural land. And again, our water sources were much larger. So they could probably get to the bay, the mud fauna there, and it would have these small oysters, mussels. A gastropod is like a snail, and clams, those little ones that you see in the top picture, that's probably what they would find right out there in the bay. Okay, and they'd have those, maybe some river otters and all too. But when you go farther out in the ocean, look at that bottom picture. There are 3 abalone. Can you find the 3 abalone? It's on a rock. Oh, one abalone just squirted, the other one moved. There's one on the back side of the rock. This orangey thing is a sea anemone. Okay, now this abalone, this is the shell of the abalone, and the soft squishy critter would suck itself down onto the rock. So to be able to get this as a food source, they would have to know how to swim. They'd have to also be able to hold their breath. And I don't know if you guys have ever put your feet in the Pacific Ocean, but it's cold, right? So again, and as soon as they would try to lift this up, the animal would hunker down onto the rock. So they might have to take a tool with them to be able to pry it up. But this is just a univalve. It's just one piece of shell. Again, the squishy animal would suck itself down onto the rocks. And these holes are already there. That's for the animal's circulation, how it breathes and exhales. Okay, and it would just scooch along that rock. The inside of this abalone, you'll see, is the real shiny. It's called mother of pearl. So it would be used a lot. Remember in the jewelry we saw some of, and the fish hooks, like these edges would break and make a fish hook. And if you saw in Vincent's Ohlone restaurant, did you see how they were using these as plates and bowls and containers? Okay, so again, they lived off the land and they used what they had. So these larger abalones, that would be farther out towards the San Francisco area. So that they probably did some trading to be able to get these larger abalones. So if you think about it, what did they have to trade? Remember we talked about the arrowheads and the baskets and all that they made. So again, they would have to work together and try to find out what each other needs. All right, so as far as our plants being used in the Ohlone foods, whoops, the plants used in our Ohlone foods, you see the abalone shell in the back that's holding something back there, some smaller shells or something maybe. Those big black shells, those are the mussels. And those again, kind of like a clam. It's kind of a, I don't know if you guys have ever eaten them. You have to steam them and then they open up when they're done. And then you see the bread. Again, they didn't buy it at the store. They would have to make it from the nuts and make different flours. And then of course, all the different kinds of greens. A lot of people say it just looks like grass. Well, no, it's special kinds of greens. And again, we see some of the fruits, walnuts, some berries. So again, the seeds, roots, just about any parts of the plants, but you would have to know because there would be some that would be poisonous or give you a bellyache. All right. So again, they made that food look pretty fancy. But in order to find your food, again, you would have to go out and see what you could find, right? And it's not going to be the same at the same all year, right? Your acorns are only going to be available in the fall. And that would be their basic flour. So they would be looking at oaks and buckeyes. Your nuts, you could eat those whole and you could save those for the year. Walnuts and pepper nuts. If you could find your aquatic plants, remember we talked a little bit about our tulies, those long skinny green ones, and the cattails that have the brown fluffy top. And then of course you'd have other berries and fruits. So in these pictures, you can see them harvesting. This looks like a root over here. They're probably harvesting maybe some kind of a onion or a potato, carrot, something like that. You can see all those roots. They're probably going to eat that white part. All right. So again, you want to try to find some food sources, but you can't eat everything all at once, right? You still have to try to be able to store some so that you have something to eat when, again, those acorns aren't available. So this is when they would grind up the raw grains and the roots or the beans or nuts and make them together with other materials later when they weren't regularly abundant. So you'd have to, again, save it throughout the year. Remember, but we didn't have freezers back then. They'd have to save them. So nuts, you know, they stay a long time. You can keep those around a while. And once they ground up the flour, then they were able to keep that as well. So this is a grind size grain top. So as the grains, as the stone is pushed around, those grains fall down. Now look at the size of the grain. This is how they would grind rice, corns, and again, you're going to grind until they get it the size they want. Now, again, this is just friction from the rock. Now look at how fine the flour is. Now that's getting to something where they can make it a mush. And again, they would try to keep that so they would have it for later on in the seasons when those weren't available. All right, so again, remember those oaks that we were looking at. We'd have lots of different ones in the area here between Masonic Home and Thule. We would have the live oaks, the blue oaks, the valleys, and the black oaks, and they all have a little different flavor. But as we look at this oak tree, so again, we would be harvesting the acorns straight from the tree. We wouldn't want them on the ground because they would probably have other critters in them by then, little insects in them. But right now they're green, so they are not ready to eat. Okay, they would be very, very bitter. So eventually when they're becoming more ripe, they would shake the tree, you'd collect all the acorns, and then you have to start processing. Okay, so as you look at my acorns that are now brown, those are ready to process and those would be ready to eat. But we don't eat the cap. You know, the cap comes off. And again, the acorns all have different shapes depending on which species they come from. You see at the bottom using 2 rocks to try to crack the acorn. The next picture you're looking at, that hard husk has been taken off. And can you find the seeds that were inside? Okay, kind of like a peanut where it has the outside husk and you got to get to the soft seeds that are on the inside. And remember, at this point, they would be kind of bitter. So they would be rinsed for a while and then they would be ground up. So if you guys want your own experiment, you can try just using, I'll even let you cheat and use metal. If you've got walnuts or any kind of nuts at home, pecans, anything like that, and you've got a nutcracker, see how easy it is to open those hard husks. Okay, I'll let you use your metal nutcrackers even to open it up. But then you can try even just with the simple rocks. Takes a while. So we remember our Ohlone used our mortar and pestle. So here's Art.
The Ohlones would gather the acorns and with this mortar and pestle will chop it to make their small grain, and then they would make mush out of it.
All right, and then you see our final product. Doesn't that look yummy? Well, it would if you were an Ohlone, because you'd be hungry. Now, they wouldn't have a glass plate, would they? So again, if they were going to bake this, they would have to come up with some kind of a container. So it would either be a basket or some kind of bark, again, something to hold it while they use those hot stones for it to bake and cook on. All right, to give you a better idea of how all this is going to work, you see these pictures of these little tule huts, but see the tule huts are up off the ground. And that's because those are granaries. Those are where they can store some of these nuts and some of these flowers. Well, why do they need to be up off the ground? Any ideas? Because you want to keep the other predators out, right? Like you want to keep the other mice and rats, squirrels, things like that out. So again, you want to protect your food source. So that would be for later on in the winter. All right, so again, you're gathering, you're getting seeds, you're crushing, you're making flour. You've got to rinse it again to get rid of some of those tannins. And then you have to figure out how to boil your mixture and get seasonings and all to put in it so it's ready to eat. So here we've got the basket I showed you last time we were in class that's weaved so tightly that it holds the water well, right? All right, but how are you going to heat it up? Now she's using these long tongs. We would be probably using metal. If you're cooking soup, something on a stove, you've got a metal pot. Again, we don't have metal yet. So she's actually using a rock. So the stone or the rock is put in the fire, it's heated up, then it's taken out and it's rinsed off because then it would have all the ash in it. And then they put it back into this acorn mush to cook it. So let's see. And it looked like it was a piece of obsidian. So we're getting the rock out of the fire. You have to rinse off the ash because you don't want all that in your acorn mush. Then there's the hot stone. And again, using those, now tongs are made out of probably the willows or could have been the red buds. Those look more like willows to me. But that hot stone is how it would actually cook that mush. All right, so here's a buckeye and it's blooming, which means the flowers are going to start setting to seed.
This is a buckeye tree that's flowering, getting ready to produce its big seeds.
Now, what's funny about the buckeyes is, again, if you tried to eat them just off the tree, they'd give you a bellyache. They do have to be rinsed and just kind of like the other acorns. But what they also figured out is when they took the water that from rinsing the nuts and all, if they threw that water into tulipan, it would stun the fish. There was a toxin in there. It wouldn't kill the fish. It would just stun them for a minute and the fish would float to the top and it'd be super easy to collect and gather the fish. So they were pretty smart in figuring that out, huh? So then once they got the nuts out, then they could rinse them, they could boil them, put them in the fires, lots of different ways that they could roast and peel them, mash them, make them into a flour. So that is the buckeye. So this is the buckeye more in the winter, when you see now just the fruit. See how big that fruit is? So we call it a buckeye. May have gotten its name because the seed, see that big brown seed, looks like the eye of a buck, of a deer, okay, of a male deer. It's real big. All right, but you see that outer husk is really holding on. And look how thick that husk is. And that's to protect that seed. But a fair bit of fruit on that tree, huh? But that's back by the seasonal wetland. All right. Again, let's look at how we find our native seeds.
The Ohlones had many trees in which they ate from. This is a walnut tree. You can start seeing California grapes growing. They're just starting. And then you have tules in the background and oak trees. The acorns from the oak trees was the staple of their existence.
All right, and again, you heard the ducks and the geese in the background. Again, that's a look over Tyson's Lagoon. Again, that area 20 years ago was an area that was just all kind of a gravel pit. This area always did have a bit of water in it, but again, we've started replanting all of these native plants to make it a little nature preserve. So it is fenced off, but it does back up kind of next to that BART parking lot, the Fremont BART station. And you enter in off of Walnut, okay? But it is closed off and we come in just by appointment only. All right, here is a black walnut tree.
This is a black walnut. Notice it has compound leaves and it has a nut that many native animals, especially small mammals, will eat.
Okay, there on the tree, it's still green, so it's not quite ripe enough, right? And we have tons of these all around Fremont. So look at this fruit closely. If you see a black kind of fruit on the ground and it's kind of a big fleshy husk, look up at the tree and see if it's a compound leaf. So it's got one part coming out and many, many leaves coming off of it, the leaflets coming off. So this black walnut, again, was an important source of protein, and it would be something that you could save over time as well. Now, why is it called a black walnut? Because when you're trying to get that husk off to get to the seed, there's a dye that makes your hands black. Okay, you can see here from these different in the processes here. But the nuts have a great flavor, and they are a favorite of a lot of the squirrels, rodents, as well as humans. And here's your California Bay Laurel. There you can see again the nut with a little bit of a husk, not as thick, starting to crack off.
This is a California Bay Laurel. It's a little different than its cousin, the Mediterranean bay leaf, which a lot of people use in Western foods. This was used by the Ohlones not only for a spice, a very spicy spice, but also for getting rid of small ants as they would put these leaves around their huts.
So that's pretty clever. And I think we still do that today, where we use the bay leaves that are dried and you put them in your cupboards and you put them around your flowers and all so that you don't get bugs in them. But again, this is a much stronger spice than the regular one that we have. Now, this is the holly leaf cherry. If you get to come into Tule Ponds over the summer, we spend a lot of time eating these little cherries.
This is a holly leaf cherry, and you could see it is just starting to flower. Some of the little holly leaf cherries are on there, but this was an important plant for the Ohlones.
So as it flowers, the flowers are pollinated. That pollinated flower is what turns into the fruit, and you see the ripened fruit there. Again, it lasts a long time. You can eat the fleshy part and save that nut, and that nut, again, could be saved for quite a while. So here we're looking at this tree to the right, where we've got more fruit. So you see how the fruit is just starting to grow. Some of those larger ones, I wouldn't say they're quite ready to pick yet. We do have a red cherry and a yellow cherry. And I usually think the yellow cherries are sweeter. And there's a hard pit in the middle. So you just pop it in your mouth and you just roll around, eat the fleshy part, and just spit out the pit. The red ones tend to be a little more tart. Okay. And our California hazelnut. If you look at that bloom on the tree, it looks kind of like a filbert fig. If you guys have ever seen a fig before, but you see how that outer husk is going to break open and reveal the nut inside. Again, many different kinds of berries. Now we had our native blackberry that is being taken over and being invasive by another blackberry. There's a difference in their leaves, but the California blackberry there you see, again, it does have the thorns on it, so you'd have to be careful picking it. They'd have the manzanita berries and the huckleberries, elderberries, California grapes, and all as well. Thing about the huckleberries is they also knew how to manage the land. They knew that they'd have to set fires every now and then to clear the meadows and clear the underbrush, because if they didn't, the huckleberries wouldn't grow in that area. If it gets too much of a canopy, it gets too shaded and too crowded, those huckleberries won't grow. If the huckleberries don't grow, the bears don't come. Okay, so they had an understanding of how the animals and the plants all worked together. And some of these berries, again, they would use as medicine, some of the different plants. So again, that information would be passed on from generation to generation. The coffee berry there, like your mom and dad probably drink some coffee, but this is a different kind of coffee berry, because if you drink this or you eat this, it would make you go to the bathroom. You'd be running. The snowberry would make you very sleepy, make you go to sleep. So again, you've got to know what you're after. Now, here's a picture of Art cutting down the blue elderberry. And this blue elderberry is actually a shrub. Even though it's very tall, it's not woody like a tree, but it's got a pith in the middle like a shrub. And again, it would have the fruit that can be ripened. And so Art is showing us how to clear out the pith. That's the middle part of the stem. But you clear it out and then you can use it as a musical instrument, pipes, or jewelry. Remember last week we had the clapper stick? That was an elderberry branch that had been cleared out, was hollow, and it would clap together, and that was their instrument. So again, you see here where Art's been able to clear this pith. And let's let Phoebe tell you about making a necklace.
Okay, so today we're making an elderberry necklace just like this. So all you're going to need is an elderberry stem right here, a popsicle stick or any kind of stick that you can use that'll fit inside the stem, a marker, and a piece of string that's long enough to go around your neck. So first we want to peel the bark off of the stem. So right here we're going to use our nail and get underneath the bark and just peel it right off, just like that. So you can see the bark comes off really easily, and you're just going to go around the entire stem and peel all this bark off. So once you have that done, you end up with a little tube like this, and you're going to use your popsicle stick now to dig into the middle, the soft part called the pith, and just take that out, just like that. So you want to twist your stick and then push it out. And you're going to go through the entire stem so that you end up with a tube like this. So you can see the hole straight through it. It's nice and clean. And now we're going to grab our marker, and you can draw whatever you want on it. You can be creative. I'm going to draw a little smiley face on mine, just like that. So you can see you can write your name, any kind of design that you want. And now you're going to grab your string and thread it straight through that hole right there. Okay, and you can use your popsicle stick to push it through just so it's easier. So you can grab it like that. And now we want to tie a knot with the string. just like that. And that's our necklace. And now you can just put it over your head. And there you go. Now we have our little elderberry
Now
necklace.
we're letting you cheat a little bit using some yarn and like the popsicle sticks and all. But again, Ohlone would have to use either the sinew, like the ligaments, tendons from the deer or an animal that they'd gotten, or they'd have to make their cordage from those grasses and those reeds and all that we saw before, and maybe from even our tules. All right. So again, that's an option, teachers. If you want to meet me tomorrow, just send me an email and let me know if you want to come and cut some elderberries. We got a bunch there. And today our elderberry is used a lot in medicine, especially like the last 2 years. Sambuca is the family name of elderberry, and you'll see the Sambuca a lot as gummies, all kinds of medicine to help with immunity. But the Ohlones, they would use it when the berries were ripe. And again, it would be a medicinal fruit or flower. Today, we make it into a liqueur, a wine, and a pie, and again, a syrup. So that is the blue elderberry. Back east, there's a black elderberry. They would also forage for roots and underground stems, other things. Now, if you look at this field, that just kind of looks like a field of grass, right? Start looking closer. Look even closer. What are those white things? Those white things are some wild onions. Okay, so they weren't just running through the grass. They actually knew what those grasses were and what they could eat. Okay, you see our little funny dancing mushroom there. But again, they would know which of these mushrooms would be safe to eat and which ones would make you sick. So again, there'd also be a wild garlic and a wild carrot as well. And one of the easiest, of course, to harvest would be those aquatic plants because they would be pretty abundant since there was much larger water area. So these cattails that you're seeing pictures of actually live along the edge of the water. So that means you got to get in the water. So if it's cold, your feet are going to get cold and it's muddy and the mud is squishy. They don't have a root and a leaf structure like a plant that lives on land. And but all of their stems can be eaten. And you see these cattails, the leaf is real flat. And then it has this big brown part. That's where the seeds are, the stems. The other picture is, again, some of the, I think the tules with the little seeds or their rushes and reeds. So again, all of these are things that they could make into flour, different food sources. All right, let's listen to Dr. Joyce for a minute. This is looking at Tyson's Lagoon.
Here is Tyson's Lagoon, and in the forefront we have cattails. Now, cattails were used by the Ohlones for food, especially it has like a celery-like texture. They also use the seeds of the cattail, and possibly they used the fluffy, mature seeds in their dispersal mechanism as a diaper. Very absorbent material.
A diaper. You think about it, they wouldn't have had diapers. So if you had a little baby and they were peeing and pooping everywhere, what would you do with it? So they would actually use this material as a diaper. Put that down in their little papoose part and be able to carry them around just fine. So again, they would know all these different parts. This would be like going to the grocery store when you went to go to these cattails. All right. This is a little video. It's going to show you more about the cattails. Again, many of the different parts can be eaten. It tells you there about the rhizomes. Those are like the roots. The starchy, fibrous, starchy kind of things like the potatoes, so to give you an idea of what it might taste like. The late spring, the bases of the leaves would be tender, so they could cook those or they could eat them. And eating them, they would kind of taste like celery. The flower spike, again, this would bloom, become that white stuff, and again, could be put into a kind of a flower. And again, lots of parts and pieces. So this is to demonstrate how you would use those cattails.
Nice. I start by cutting the roots from the base of the stalk.
Oh, he's using a knife.
The roots are valuable because they are packed with starch, but I won't be processing those today.
A bone, remember the bone saw?
I then separate the leaves from around the stalk. As you can see, there is a clear slime that can be found underneath the leaves. Although it looks gross, this slime can be used as medicine. It is a natural antiseptic and analgesic. This means it can be used to keep wounds clean, while at the same time relieving pain and inflammation. For centuries, cattail jelly has been popular for treating and relieving sunburn, bug bites, toothaches, cuts, bruises, and more. Anyway, back to the task at hand. Most field guides suggest cutting the stalk at 4 inches, but you don't have to be strict with that number. As long as the stalk is tender, that's all that matters. The white part is obviously the most tender, so judging by that, I figured I could get away with cutting them at around 6 inches. Here's what the end of the stalk looks like.
Kind of like celery.
As you can see, it is made up of several different layers. I'd like to draw your attention to the core, which is sticking out slightly from the end of the stalk. This is what I'll be eating. The outer layers are too fibrous to eat, but the core is tender enough to eat raw. Although I have eaten cattail shoots raw before, I like them best when they're cooked.
Okay. So again, remember that Ohlones didn't have metal. So you would be using that bone awl or the bone saw or obsidian piece, something that would be sharp that you could use to cut. But again, you see all the work that has to go into it. It's not like it's a quick, easy snack. It does take some work. I have a feeling a lot of you guys would be going kind of hungry, huh? I don't think you guys are eating a whole lot of celery. I don't see you guys eating a lot of celery. All right, let's keep going. Now remember our tules that we talked about last time made our tule house and the tule boat. So the tules were the long skinny reeds and they're a dark green. And then as they dry, they kind of turn this tan color. And the Ohlones again figured out that once they got them to dry, they could re-wet them and then they could bend them into different forms to make baskets, all types of things. So you see our boat there and the tule house. And then also this house on the right is they would also make some larger homes that were called long houses. And again, that would be where more people could gather. But once the tules were dried and re-wetted, they'd also be waterproof. So that's why they were used on the outside and on the roofing there, because that give them a nice dry place. So these are, again, the tules. But as we get a close look at the tules, now see again, you'd have to be getting in the water. And again, it's muddy, so you're gonna be sinking in the mud. Mud's kind of smelly. But you can see right now the tules are just now starting to grow. We have a lot of the old brown tules, and as soon as the new ones start to grow, then the old brown ones tend to degrade and fall apart more. But they would use parts of these as you see the flours, syrups, and the sugars, like in a raw salad or as a cooked vegetable. They would find them around all the ponds and marshes. But in our area, 90% of our tules have disappeared. So that's why it's so important that we have them at Tule Pond. And I don't know if you remember from the last class, they're important for us at Tule Pond because that's a stormwater retention area. And these tules actually help clean the water. There's a fungus on the roots, on the rhizomes, that actually help pull in all the heavy metals that come in off of the roads and all. So again, very important for cleaning the water. All right, Phoebe's gonna show us how to make a tule doll using the reeds.
Ohlone children are just like children of today. They wanted to have toys and things to play with too. So they would take tules like this that are dried and then wet them so they're bendable and use that to make things like ducks, boats, other little things, and dolls like this too.
All right, so again, it would take some practice, right? The first thing you make, like you can't go out and just the first time be able to make a wonderful tule house or a wonderful tule boat that floats. You practice and you learn as you're a kid, and you get better and better and better at it until finally you're good enough that you can make a tule boat. Okay, so if anybody wants to come by tomorrow and collect tules, everyone would need, like each kid would need 3 tules to be able to make that doll. There are some instructions for you, and I will be at Tule Ponds after 9, but if you're interested in those, again, teachers, I need you to send me an email at msn@msnucleus.org and let me know how many kids you have, and we can have some boxes set up, and the elderberries you guys can cut. Okay. All right. So after you've done all this foraging, you've been in the mud, you've been climbing all over trees, you've been in the fires. After you eat, then we got to get cleaned up and go to the bathroom. Okay. If you think about it, think about what you use today. You use soap, shampoo, cream rinse, blow dryers, straighteners, all different kinds of soap. You have so many different products. But look at this palm olive. This is a more current product. And this is made from the animal fats or the oils. And if you look at the word palm olive, so it's made from the palms, like the palm trees, and the olive trees. Okay, so that's where palm olive originally came from. Okay, many of our soaps today, again, are made out of those fats and oils. And our toilet paper, very important during the pandemic. Toilet paper is, of course, processed from trees. But now, way back then, you wouldn't have had these. So what would you do? Just run around dirty, filthy? Let's see what you could do.
This is your ceanothus, and we're going to see if we can make some soap. You put water on it, and then you rub it, and it will start with a lather, as you can see there. Now you can wash your hands, and that's natural soap from the ceanothus, California lilac.
How about that? California lilac. You see those little cute little purple blooms? With just a little bit of water, it actually creates a soap. So that little bit of the seeds and all that's still left in their hands, they could just scooch that off, it could dry, and again, they could use it again the next time they needed to wash their hands. We also would have soap roots. And you see those are much larger, but that would also make kind of soap into that fibery, almost like a soapy brush, okay? So again, they would be able to clean up. Now, what about that toilet paper? How would you live without toilet paper? You'd have to find a substitute, right? No factories yet, no stores. So you would use the leaf of the sycamore tree. Now, Art's showing you this leaf. It's a leaf that's kind of the shape of a palm. It's a big leaf, and it's soft and kind of fuzzy. All right. So it would be very important to, again, know the plants that are around you, because if you made the mistake and grabbed the poison ivy leaf, then that would be an issue. Okay, so again, make sure you knew what the sycamore tree was, because it has the nice big fuzzy leaf. All right, one last video on this food prep.
This is a Blackberry Yerba Buena Bay Laurel dipping sauce, and we will add a little bit of acorn flour to this to thicken it. This is the Bay Laurel we gathered yesterday. These are quail eggs, Atush Texan in our language. These are going to be soft boiled for 3 minutes, and we're going to have roasted venison backstrap that's wrapped in Yerba Buena.
All right, the Yerba Buena that he's holding, that plant, that's actually the Ohlone name for the San Francisco area. That is the region they called Yerba Buena. All right, so again, gives you an idea. Their foods were pretty fancy. They could make it look fancy. Unfortunately, that Ohlone Cafe has closed during the pandemic. They sourced out for a while, but I think the bookstore was sold. So we're hoping that Vincent will find another great location around, because again, it is a great opportunity for people to learn.